Every minute of every day, the SAIA Group is working to make products that make a world of difference. To homeowners and business owners, to families and to communities. The SAIA Group is a multinational company with operations covering Eastern, Central and Southern Africa. The group is Africa's largest producer of steel roofing and sheeting and the first producer of aluminium zinc-coated steel on the continent. With over 36 businesses and insights gathered over 50 years, the SAIA Group has remained at the forefront in providing products that lead the industry. The group opened its first manufacturing facility in Mombasa, Kenya in 1962 and has grown steadily, now operating in 12 countries, using the world's leading aluminium zinc metal coating technology and state-of-the-art color coating processes to produce the coil used by its roofing operations. The outputs of more than 30 roof manufacturing operations make the SAIA Group the largest producer of metal roof sheeting in Africa. A full range of associated products are also available to provide a complete solution from one trusted source. The group is founded on a bold vision: to make a world of difference. The SAIA Group roofing operations strive to provide customers with the best metal products they can afford, suiting all applications, from residential homes to offices, commercial and industrial applications. Steel sheeting is roll-formed in factories or on-site, in various profiles and finishes, and supplied complete with accessories for a complete roofing solution. At the group's metal coating plants, steel is coated to give it a longer lifespan. The SAIA Group was the first producer of aluminium zinc-coated steel in Africa, the world's most advanced coating alloy to deliver an extended service life to steel. Metal-coated steel is sold under the brand name Zincal. Color-coated Zincal is sold under the brand names Color Plus, Optima and Optima Plus, in an array of popular colors that are both durable and beautiful. To complement its roofing brands, specialist products have been developed by the SAIA Group, such as the fixed-tight fastener products, steel pipes and hollow sections, and other value-added accessories for the building industry. The SAIA Group lays great store on being a socially responsible corporate citizen. Its focus is primarily on the communities in which it operates, particularly those who are most affected by poverty and social disadvantage. The group also supports innovators who serve as role models for community upliftment. Steel is uniquely placed to help communities across Africa meet the challenges of development in a sustainable, responsible manner. And at the end of its life, steel is 100% recyclable, helping minimize the impact of the built environment on our precious planet. The SAIA Group is committed to finding solutions today for a better tomorrow and to making a world of difference.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Karuni Naidoo. I'm an architect and I live and practice in Durban. I'm also the chairperson of the SAIA Transformation Committee, and this webinar is part of our program. Karina, could you? Yeah. This is a program for today. We will have a presentation from Barbara Mommen, which is a PowerPoint presentation, an introduction to the topic. It'll be followed by a panel discussion with all four panelists, question and answers, and then concluding remarks. The audience are requested to please post your questions in the chat. We will collect them and respond to them later. Next slide, Karina. The South African Institute of Architects is a voluntary association for professional architects, which was originally established in 1927. The mission of the Institute is to act as the collective voice serving the interests of its members in pursuit of excellence and responsible design. It aims to uphold the dignity of the architectural profession and contribute meaningfully to the enhancement of society and the environment. Next. We have 9 regions: Bordekai, Sifa, Eastern Cape, Free State, Gifa, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Pretoria. This is a series 2 of the SAIA Many Voices webinar series. The series started in 2021, and on the screen are the 6 webinars that we undertook in series 1. Series 2, we are a webinar #4 on this list, and we've got 2 more to complete. We've been fortunate to be sponsored by Safel Steel, and they will introduce themselves and speak to you after this. Next slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Karuni, and SAIA for letting us come in here again. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity for us to obviously sponsor an event like this. We find this topic very enlightening, and it is a very real topic to us. So my name is Christopher Knight. I'm one of the technical marketing officers for Safel Steel, and the last 3 years have certainly been challenging within the built environment, and I think you would all agree to that. And we as Safel Steel have experienced the lack of raw material for one of them, as well as very volatile conditions due to the effects of the pandemic, the looting, the flooding, and obviously current political values that are happening now. And during the actual pandemic, it led to an increase of volumes of imported material coming into South Africa. So it has negatively affected the economy as well as the built environment due to the lack of quality products being imported, as well as the incorrect import taxes being charged on these items. So with the above said, it's not that all imported products are bad, but it's important to ensure that the material installed is equivalent to the specification on your drawings. So obviously we offer the services of assisting with specifications. And then in closing, us as Safel Steel, we do focus our energy on ensuring that our product is of a quality standard and it is supplied locally. Thus, we pride ourselves on the services that we offer and ultimately building Africa with pride. So enjoy this webinar today, guys. I think it's going to really enlighten all of us as to what impact the current, the past 3 years, as well as what's going to happen in the near future. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Building is more than assembling a structure, more than putting the pieces together. It's about building relationships, building trust, building pride. It's about having a vision and seeing it come to life as a testament to human strength and creativity. That's why we do what we do, driven by passion and powered by state-of-the-art technology. Safel Steel is an African thought leader in world-class building solutions that offer long-term sustainability. We are the only producer of aluminium zinc-coated products in South Africa, and each product in our range is made with pride and care. Our pre-painted color-coated steel sheets are lightweight, fire-resistant, weatherproof, eco-friendly, and energy-reflective. They are easy to install and highly durable, not to mention beautiful to look at. We also manufacture pre-painted coils, international quality, produced locally. At Safel Steel, quality assurance is a key priority. We demand extensive quality checks during manufacture which is why we have confidence in our product warranty. Beyond our product offering, our services also include training, technical support during the building process, and expert knowledge resources. That's because we love being part of the journey, every step of the way. Safal Steel, building Africa together and building it with pride.
Thank you. I'll just introduce the SAIA Code of Ethics. We don't have too much time to go into it, but SAIA does have a code of ethics for members that are attending today. It's a commitment to maintaining the highest standards of professionalism, integrity, and competence. The Code of Ethics is just establishes the principles for the conduct of members in pursuance of these goals. The code is arranged in 3 sections. Principles are the broad principles of ethical conduct. Then there are the rules, which are mandatory, and violation of those rules are grounds for disciplinary action by SAIA. The notes are a commentary to assist members in complying with the code, and those are charged with the enforcement of the rules. The notes do not form part of the rules. The code addresses the responsibilities of all members in following their professional duties to, amongst many, the public, the profession, the environment, clients, users of architecture, other members of the architectural profession, to promote the art and science of architecture, contractors, consultants, members of the public, and other third parties affected by our work. The Code of Ethics document is available on the SAIA website at www.saia.org.za. Next slide, Karina. Barbara Mommen, I will just introduce the panel. Barbara Mommen has great experience in the transport, trade and development. She's a transport, trade and development corridor specialist. She served as COO and CEO of the Maputo Corridor Logistics Initiative, which is a corridor management institution for trade and transport corridor for Mozambique, Eswatini, and South Africa. She's also a member of the African Europe Foundation Strategic Working Group on Transport and Communications. She's also a certified ethics officer and a project associate with the Ethics Institute, and is passionate about ensuring that ethics and integrity are brought into every level of public and private sector endeavor. She has extensive experience in process facilitation and stakeholder engagement. Next slide. Kumarsen Thamburan is a professional architect. He's also an advocate for the profession and an independent thinker. He's made huge contributions to work in the built environment. Unapologetically, he's constantly in pursuit of equality and equal opportunities in the profession and in industry as a whole, making him an advocate for change. Apart from 25 years in private practice, Kumarsen has led organizations and structures within the built environment profession. He has been a PROXA committee member from 2007 to date. He's chairperson of the SAPOA Building Development Committee, 2007-2009, technical committee of the JBCC between 2015 and 2017, a board member of the JBCC, president of GIFA, a SAIA board member, a committee member of the CSCC, a founding member of the South African Union of Architects, and chairperson of the board of the JBCC. Next. Architect krynauw is a beneficiary of multiple national and international awards, and one project which has attracted an award for environmental sensitivity. He has been active in transformation and founded and chaired the GIFA Transformation Committee. He has also served as a member of the SAIA Transformation Committee. He chaired the GIFA Practice Committee for almost a decade and was on the SAIA Practice Committee for the same time, where he was known for work regarding SAIA and elevating the title architect. He was also vice president and president of GIFA. He advocates for the abolition of the word race in favor of ethnicity and an understanding and application of ethics. As a conservationist, he advocates for passive energy tools as a method to foster sustainable buildings. Paul Kgole is a registered professional quantity surveyor. He was born and raised in Soweto, occupied leadership roles from a very young age in the youth development movement through ballroom dancing, sport, indoor games, debates through the Soweto youth clubs. He's actively involved in the built environment professions and the construction industry as a quantity surveyor, qualified from Wits University in 1986 with a Bachelor of Science degree in quantity surveying. Paul always breaks frontiers and creates new ground. He was the first and only Black student in a class at Wits University from second year to final year, and the first and only Black quantity surveyor at Farrell Lang and Partners in the late 80s. Then the first Black partner at FWJK. He was the first Black representative on the JBCC board and Proxa. Through the organizations and group of companies, Paul serves numerous public and private sector clients in infrastructure, retail, property management projects, dispute resolution, past, present, and future. So these are our panelists. Next slide. I will just introduce the topic. Those of you who registered would have read the topic, but I'll just go through it again. The title is Ethics, Values, and Realigning the Moral Compass. We live in challenging times in South Africa. State capture, followed by a pandemic, and the Zondo Commission report has revealed an overwhelming scale of corruption and unethical practice by individuals and institutions across all sectors. This has affected us all and left many of us disillusioned. We present today a panel of leaders who serve within professional institutions and structures, business and civil society groupings and communities. They will share their views and opinions on the topic, what values guide them and drive them in their work. They will also provide insights on how we can, as individuals, citizens, professionals, and institutions, towards renewal and change, contribute to realigning the moral compass and building an ethically responsible society. Thank you. I will hand over to Barbara Mommen, who will start with the presentation. Karina.
Good. And again, thank you so much, Karuni, for the invitation to talk about ethics, which is my other passion apart from trade, transport and development. And I represent the Ethics Institute, which is a non-profit independent organization which really does amazing work all over Southern Africa and, well, in 30 African countries, Europe and the Middle East. And one of my pet projects in ethics is in Mozambique, which is really proving to be a great challenge, but very, very worthwhile. So I think we can start by saying in our day and age that quite often we might think that ethics and morality are stupid and old-fashioned. As this child says to his mum, we learned today in school that ethics and morality are stupid and old-fashioned. Well, in fact, it may appear to be so, and in this country specifically, we are forgiven for thinking that that is the case. But what I'm going to do today is look at a little bit about what is ethics and how does it affect us, how does it affect our society, and how does unethical behavior really, what is the impact of that? So I think if we look at ethics, we've also got to look at its foundation, which is in personal values and in morals. So if we look at personal values, we're looking at what the individual sees as standards of right and wrong based on core convictions, and those convictions guide decisions. And it's almost like an internal structure that shapes the way that a person behaves. If we look at morals, these are ideals and principles that guide you in determining what is right and wrong, and almost like your individual rule book that defines how you behave. And those are very much dependent on your values and very much supported by your values. They can be shared values, but they can also vary widely from person to person, and particularly from culture to culture. And then ethics is really a guiding principle about behavior. It serves as the basis for making practical decisions, and ethics, or the lack of it will motivate us to look at how we behave, practice proper or improper behavior. I know that a lot of these words are very loaded, and we're speaking very generally, so there's not enough time to sort of go into the philosophy of all the words and the semantics, but the principles are very much what I'm focusing on at this point. And if we look at ethics, there are three key foundations. The issue of good, and I'll get to that in a minute, the self, and the other. And really what one wants to look at when you make an ethical decision or you think about ethics, we've got to be able to balance these three things: the good, the self, and the other. And essentially, if we look at what good is, the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And then the platinum, which comes straight after that, is do unto others as they would want to be done unto them. I know that sounds a little bit awkward, but I couldn't think of another way to put it. So it's what you want to do so that other people are satisfied that it's a fair, reasonable, and decent and good decision for themselves and for other people. And this is a very interesting, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Frans de Waal's writings. He is a researcher, and he's written many books and researched animals, particularly primates, and found very interestingly that they display characteristics of love, fear, shame, guilt, joy, empathy even, and I'm sure that if you're an animal lover you will have noticed that, and interestingly enough, fairness. And I think that is a really interesting point when we look at how the human mind can in fact make itself quite malleable and decide that it can be empathetic or not. Animals usually respond spontaneously, and quite often what he's saying is that these non-human animals, he calls us human animals, but non-human animals can really provide quite an insight into values and how social structures work. So with that background, how important are ethics in today's society? Well, it has shared meaning because we very seldom, unless we have a tragic life, live in isolation. Our civilization is dependent on specialization, on people who do things specifically for, like yourselves, division of labor. In other words, we need different skills for different areas. We depend on interaction and cooperation. And this is a great example. And since I flew to the Cape just yesterday, it did make me think how many people it takes to do your job effectively to get a passenger aircraft to fly from Johannesburg to Cape Town. It's a significant number. And so again, when we look at ethics, keep in mind that this is a shared issue. It's a community issue. Successful groups are defined by trust, cooperation, honesty and open communication, fairness and justice, and then reciprocal altruism, which is, this where there's a mutual beneficiation, and it is all about sharing an ethical approach which says, is it good for me? Is it good for the other? And is it good for society? So what is this ethics morality thing? As I said, it's a standard of right and wrong that prescribes, and often it's an internal prescription that we should have to as a normative standard for our behavior. It allows for fairness, cooperation, empathy. It's a dynamic social process, and I think this is something that I've noticed very much in my work in Mozambique, that as issues raise themselves, as people become more aware of certain issues, it's not a static issue. It is also, it requires recalibration, if you like, over time. And it is definitely about context. And one of those things is, I mean, if we had this discussion 50 years ago, the issue around marijuana being legalized would have been an absolute no-go topic. The same as pro-choice, the death penalty, assisted dying, and so on. So when we look at this issue around good, the good for society, for self, and for others, we really need to, if we look at organizations, we look at what is their mandate. Is that mandate balanced around these three factors? The same as what are their convictions? What are the values? And I mean, we all, if we work in organizations, we're all very good at writing this is what we value, these are our code of ethics, and so on and so on. But in actual fact, rules, policies, procedures all inform how we conduct ourselves. But it's not as easy as that, as those of you will know. The pillars of reciprocity, fairness, empathy, and being able to take someone else's perspective is never as easy as it looks in the policy documents, in the procedure documents. And often we find that we challenge even just trying to decide how to work in a particular situation. King 4 is quite clear that in the context of organizations, that ethics is what refers to ethical values applied to decision-making, behavior, and the relationship between organization, its stakeholders, and broader society. And I think that's crucial. And I mean, it's something that isn't only valuable for the kind of work of a professional organization like SAIA, but it is in every situation. If we look at ethical values, those are the good that apply. And the organization in this case is the self, and then its stakeholders and broader society. And it's quite important that when we look at ethics, that we look more broadly than ourselves and at the values, but into the context. The context is incredibly important. This is an interesting question. You don't have to answer it, but it's more rhetorical if you can just think about it. You're the only passenger in the car, and your friend, the driver of the vehicle, is clearly speeding in an urban area. The car hits an elderly person crossing the road with fatal consequences. So your friend now faces serious criminal charges. And as the only witness, the police ask you whether your friend was speeding at the time of the incident. What are your options? And if you have these three, what would you do? Would you say, yes, my friend was speeding? No, my friend wasn't speeding? Or sorry, I really don't know. And this is really why I've asked this question, is to introduce you to how these ethical questions can become quite difficult when we are emotionally invested or financially invested in something, and it becomes quite a conundrum. So if I ask you this, if you're never going to be caught out for unethical behavior, does it mean you should still be ethical? Is there a reason to still be ethical? Because, and our country is a prime example, many people get away with unethical or dishonest behavior. Why should we be ethical? Well, I think I don't have to explain this picture. Unethical behavior quite frequently is a result of a whole cultural context, as well as a whole range of decisions that have been made and take you to the place where you have a willing buyer, willing seller in the case of corrupt activities. But it goes beyond that as well. Why should we actually address corruption? And I found these statistics incredibly telling. The average income in countries with a high level of corruption is about a third of countries with a low level of corruption. So let's assume then that's saying that a higher level of poverty means that you're going to have a higher level of corruption. Also, the infant mortality rate in these countries is about 3 times higher, and the literacy rate 25% lower. And I think in recent years, we've seen on the news and heard frequently of how these factors have become almost accepted in our country. Why is that? Well, it's simply because corruption increases inequality. And really the people that it affects are the poor. And if we look at the overused example of Eskom, where Eskom's power issues affect everyone, it's those with the means who can actually manage to get the solar and the batteries and the electric vehicles, or the, you know, and have these things charged and available. But what it does to the poor is completely remove that access. And if we look at how our local municipalities are behaving, we are seeing that public expenditure is definitely not going where it should be going. And I thought this was quite telling. It's from one of the Zimbabwean papers speaking about the sanctions that were imposed, I think it was between 2012 and 2018, I think. And it's very true of that issue, where we see that lower income countries are definitely have a higher corruption rate. So there is a case for ethical behavior. Does it pay to be ethical? I think that's very difficult to answer, because how does one define that payment? Obviously, people would like to say, well, will it make me money to be ethical? But I think so. We really need to ask the question instead, what is the cost of unethical behavior? And I think Superior cartoon from 2019 couldn't be more relevant. So what is the business case? Well, interestingly, there's been some research that shows, especially among startups, that if they're involved in any sort of unethical behavior in their startups, that those businesses seldom last between 3 or beyond 5 years. Apart from that, you've got huge risk around the legal, financial, staff turnover. You've got client alienation. You've got all the issues that you do not want if you have a business that you want to have sustainable. However, ethical behavior builds reputation, it builds trust with stakeholders, and all of the good things that are listed on the right here: client loyalty, staff morale, meaning and value for staff, sustainability, and you're able to perform better. However, quite frequently, the kinds of decisions that are made are more about the bottom line than really what is required. And I think sometimes this is equally true. This gentleman saying, get serious, Don, we're talking business ethics, not ethics. In other words, ethics is quite frequently sort of watered down, maybe. It's different when you're doing business. In actual fact, that is something that is not true. And sorry about the poor quality here. One of the big issues we find, certainly in our Mozambique work and some of the work we do here, is a perennial discussion around conflicts of interest. So she says, I'm sorry, you can't use Acme Services, you own stock in the company. What about Infogrub? Your wife is a senior VP over there. How about Miser Industries? Your brother works for them. This is crazy, he says. What's the use of having conflicts of interest if you can't use them? And then it's also around, well, you know, we can bend the rules. Here he's saying to his wife, yes, I've been unfaithful, Ellen, but it's a good kind of unfaithful. Unethical behavior is never good. Conflicts of interest again. I think this is one of the last. Alice, and I think for those of you who are in corporate or have own companies or are working with teams of people, Alice, I know you didn't mean to do anything wrong, but you would have known you weren't supposed to do that if you'd read our code of conduct. And she says, we were supposed to read it. Very common problem. Very often our code of ethics, our codes of conduct, and our guiding principles are merely a document that sits on a shelf. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have, and that is that ethics is usually left for, and I'm generalizing here, but we find it a lot in organizations, that it's left for special programs or a special focus over 2 weeks, and then no one says anything again for months and months, when in actual fact it should be a daily discussion at every meeting. Because it's not easy. I think that's why this man goes to the doctor, because he really can't handle the pangs of conscience and needs to get rid of them. So the ethical challenges are normally where something is, if it's not a clear right or wrong, but if it is, they're usually policies, rules, or codes that can be followed. But the biggest challenge is really, it lies with the individual. Will the individual do the right thing? And that's the tricky part, because what we found in the most recent 2023 business survey of ethics is that 38% of organizations have had a major challenge with ethics when they have found that their treatment of staff and equality issues and higher levels of frustration with management not listening and not treating people with fairness, that those organizations actually struggle really very much with corruption and corrupt activities. This is an interesting question. Who controls your behavior? Is it the organization with the strict rules? And I think this is a very telling example. It's a social experiment that was carried out by a professor at Stanford University in the 1970s, where they simulated a prison situation where some of the volunteers, all of these were volunteers, none of them were criminals. Some of them were to role play as prisoners and others as prison guards. And it was really to measure the effect of role-playing, labeling, and social experimentation and social pressure on the individual's ability to deal with the situation. Well, what happened so alarmingly and so quickly is that those who were role-playing the guards really did such a professional job that they had to stop the experiment after just 6 days because they were starting to abuse the prisoners and to really do very unethical things. And so I think an interesting thing is we have to look at what controls our behavior. Is it something internal? Is it an external thing? Do you change your mind when you're under pressure? Do you forget that you have your own values, your own morals, and your own ethics? And quite often these are when we face 2 or more choices, all of which lead to less desirable consequences, and when values conflict, and that's not an unusual thing. And then we need to look at damage control. How do we reduce the harm that is done by poor ethical decisions? These are a few of them. Conflicts of interest I've mentioned. Gifts and entertainment. It's great to see a lot of companies are saying no gifts, no entertainment, it doesn't feature. Restructuring. Uncertainty in the workplace does provide quite a difficult ethical dilemma. And the work from home policy, which is something after COVID, which has raised itself over and over and again as an issue around ethical. Do we trust our employees? Can we trust our bosses who work remotely? How can we be sure that our colleagues are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? So there's some red flags, and these are not going to be new to you. When people say, I don't want my name attached to XYZ, or we should get legal advice on this one. Not always, but sometimes our competitors do it, so why shouldn't we? We should keep this between us. It's not our responsibility. We deserve this. No one will know. And if you're ever in that position, get your running shoes on and run in the opposite direction. So to conclude, ethics is a pro-social construct. It is about the good, the needs of self, and the other that need to be considered. And I think one needs to identify and understand the legitimate ethical expectations of stakeholders. Quite often in big companies, they feel they cannot control their suppliers, for example, but there are ways in which the Ethics Institute, and certainly in the projects that I'm working, where you strengthen the capacities of suppliers to work ethically by giving them a sort of a mandatory ethics training or ethics awareness training, so that you can go to them afterwards and say, well, you did this, but you certified yourself as ethically aware, for example, how we can't use you because you've broken this code. It's not just a one-way thing. It's not just about the company. It's also about your suppliers. And I think probably this point is the most important. The ethics dialogue is critical to the ethical maturity of an organization. We have to talk about ethics all the time, because on a daily basis in our country, we are faced with ethics challenges. And that's why the context is so important. Tough decisions require good justification and open communication. And I love this. The path of least resistance is what makes rivers run crooked. I'm going to obviously deal with some of the issues in the discussion, but would be happy to take questions at a later stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to get the panel discussion going, but before I do that, if our audience could please send through their questions, please, so that we could respond to them. Kumarsen, I'm going to start with you, get you going with question number 1. And we've heard how values are an individual person's sense of what is right and wrong. So I'm going to ask the panel to just share their personal values, ideals, and principles with us today. What is your sense of right and wrong? What makes you who you are, and what drives you? Kumarsen, do you want to start? And you would need to switch on your camera, please.
that good?
Thank you. We can see you.
You see me? Good. Good lighting. Yeah, look, I think thanks to SAIA for the invitation. I think I don't know why I'm going to get roped into these things. The second one that I'm doing, and it's probably got to do with my presence out in the industry and in the built environment. But nevertheless, it's good to see that it's making a difference, and it's all for a good purpose. Look, Karuni, I think when we talk morals and ethics, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives, and being an architect, we face with this every single day. Having to contend with moral and ethical issues in how we deal with our clients, our colleagues, other built environment professionals, and most importantly, how we deal with design. And I think it's close to us because our actions affect so many in society, and I think it's special. Because you can't really remove the connection between architecture and society, and they are intrinsically connected. Hence, the care that we need to take in how we practice architecture is the key. So, having said that, I think it was Owen Hopkins that said that put it very aptly in an article and a paper that he wrote probably about a decade ago about architects just being players in someone else's game, and that's quite telling, and begs the question, well, if everything starts and ends with us as architects, and us being the custodians of the built environment, what are we doing? Are we standing by what we believe in? Are we designing fit for purpose? Are we designing within unrealistic budgets? And all of these things have consequences to them. And I think if we're playing in someone else's game, do we actually have the attitude, the skill, the know-how to actually say to someone in no uncertain terms that I don't believe that what you're asking of me is appropriate, or it's how I'd like to solve the problem? Because generally we as architects are solving problems. We solve problems that other people put in front of us. That has a knock-on effect and affects a lot more people. So look, I think it's quite simple. I mean, the reality of what we choose to be ethical, is directly connected to our virtues that we have, and those virtues are broad. It's about honesty, it's about courage, it's about kindness, it's about respect. And I think that happens at every level, whether you're engaging with a toddler or you're engaging with a grown adult. All those kinds of things should be core to how we engage with people, and could be and should be central to how we engage with people. And more often than not, we're faced with these decisions about, okay, well, it's ethically right for me to make that decision, because I've analyzed what right from wrong is from my moral standing and my moral understanding of what the situation is. But how is that decision actually going to be received by someone that's directly affected by it? I think that's what it is, and I think Barbara touched on it earlier. Why is it so easy to act unethically? Is it because of the lack of accountability in your actions that you take? Is it that? Is it directly that? Is it only that? Is it a part of it? These are all the questions that kind of lead to why people do what they do and why they find it necessary to act in a certain way or behave in a certain way. But look, I'll stop there. But I think, you know, I think when we're dealing with these kinds of things, whether it's a personal level or a professional level, and at a professional level, you're dealing with it at the highest level of integrity, and I think that's what it's all about. And the integrity of how we do business, how we engage, all of that is central to who we are as architects. I'll stop there with that, Karuni.
Thanks, kumarsen. Krynauw, would you like to follow through or follow on, and we can discuss?
Thank you, and thank you for asking me to be on the panel. I'm very grateful to see how many people are attending. And for those attending, I hope that you are members of SAIA or a region or at least another VA, not only because it shows your clients that you're striving for higher levels of quality than just being registered with SACAP, but also because there are code of ethics that you can study that could be useful. The question about what drives me and what has made me what I am, I probably always go back to the first sentence that I read as a young school child. I was about 6 years old, and we were doing the cat sits on the mat and the hat is flat and that kind of reading at school. And we went to church, and there on the pulpit was a big velvet cloth with gold embroidery that said God is love. Now that made total sense to me. And I must tell you that since then, it's just been a huge disappointment because the world clearly does not prescribe to that. So we all have an innate sense of love and fairness. And for me, God is not only love, but God is also truth. So can I deal with the truth? And can I help other people to deal with the truth? If I'm not dealing with the truth, I am by definition delusional. So am I staying delusional in order to make other people comfortable, or will I raise the truth? And sometimes my sense of truth is not shared, but there is something, there are just things that are universally true. So for me, the first thing that we need to look at in this country is the vast gap between the understanding that mere non-criminal behavior is not nearly level of ethics. Just because I have served my prison sentence, etc., can I now make decisions? I've served a sentence for theft or corruption or something. I'm back in the street and I'm back in making decisions. I mean, ethical behavior would very often be where somebody would actually refuse to work with an organization again because of the damage that that organization may suffer because of the connotations. Ethics is always a thing for me that must be expanding. The first thing that's needed is an awareness of ethics. And then secondly, a continuing expanding vision of ethics. Ethics is for me also always going to be subjective and not objective. Any code of ethics or code of conduct is always going to be an attempt to write those rules, and we find them in spiritual texts, for instance, the 10 Commandments, but even those could probably be worked on. One of my favorites is thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not steal. But there's a Buddhist version that says, avoid not taking what is not on offer. So, you know, it's such a beautiful way of rephrasing, thou shalt not steal. It's saying avoid those situations. And I think avoidance and ethics are closely related to one another. And the biggest enemies for me of ethics are probably money, power, to some extent fame and sex. And if those things come your way, I always say, if money is coming in the door, then ethics is probably leaving the room. So be very careful of that. It's not that making money is unethical, but just be careful of that. A sense of self justification. If you have to justify yourself, then probably there's something that has already gone wrong. So I think that these are, it's linked to high spiritual values for me. And the word, why do I follow ethics in my life? And I'm not doing it 100%, it's a continued growth curve. But why do I do it? Because to me, my integrity is invaluable. Integrity comes from the word integer. In maths, it means a whole number. It means I'm not fragmented, I'm not broken up. And it gives other people a pretty predictable view of who you are and how to involve or not involve you in certain situations. So I think the idea of integrity being the same wherever I am, whether it's at home or at school, in the office, I can be the same person because people can predict that I'm not going to participate in certain behaviors. Thank you for that.
Thank you, krynauw. Is Paul? Paul, yes, switched your. We'd love to see you, Paul. You can.
I'm gonna try.
On.
I'm on load shedding. I'm gonna try, but if I'm
Okay.
dark, I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, good. Okay. No. Good afternoon, colleagues.
Yes. Well, a sort of a form of Paul. You there? Oh, good. We've got you. Yeah.
Panelists, I just joined when Barbara was giving a very informative educational presentation about the day-to-day challenges of today vis-a-vis the ethics. First of all, let me thank the institute. People call it SAIA. I call it the Institute of Architects, for this opportunity to once again be to contribute. I've had so many invitations over a number of years, including the design awards and so forth, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks, Karuni, for the invitation. And we hope that the colleagues who are on the webinar also will get something. Now, just as a start, most of the items about the ethics, what makes me, who am I, between right and wrong and so forth. It's basically embedded in what I call the self. And the self, I mean myself, and then within the self, I'm driven by what we call a belief. And we know that spiritually people will tell you what is a belief. That's a confirmation and belief in what cannot be easily seen by different people. Now, one of the things that I think in terms of the ethics is very critical, especially in today's world, not only in this country, but all over the world, is to basically look at oneself within the bigger picture of the world. And what do I say by that? There is this thing called, or what I called material. There's so much material going around today. And of course, the other one is what I call populism. So you find that there'll always be these popular statements, popular rhetorics, popular this and that, where as a person, you may not necessarily agree with some of those populism, but because the society, as Barbara was saying, the perception has created a situation that as an individual, you have to comply with what the popular belief is. That will also go with the public policy. There are many public policy positions which are there, which may not necessarily be in line with one's own self about what is right and what is wrong. Remember, the issue of what is right and what is wrong, colleagues, is really relative. What may be right to a person may not necessarily be right to somebody else, and vice versa. Sorry, let me just do this. And then also what may seem to be wrong to a person, may not be the same to another person. So the whole thing is relative, and it boils down to the the individual. Now, one of the issues of right or wrong is for the professions. By the way, I'm not an architect. I'm a quantity surveyor by profession. But in my 30 or so years, I've engaged with many architects, right from the experienced architects, including young architects, and I still engage even today. So, but the professions, they're all under what we call the built environment and controlled by the different built environment professional acts. So I'm fairly easy with those issues. Now, one of the issues, for instance, that we've seen, when you look at the powers of the council, there are 6 councils now with the CBE, and all of them are very interesting because they have the same impact that they basically bestow amongst us as professionals. So one of them as a council is to advise the minister. And I was looking at the SAIA one, which is very interesting now, and under the general powers of the council of SAIA, clause 14 E, and which reads that the powers of in this act is to advise the minister, any other minister, or the CBE on any matter relating to the architectural professions. Now, when you look at the architects, the other built environment professionals, I think they've basically derelicted their duties, that of advising the minister or the ministers, not the other way around. I mean, ministers today are doing as they please. Presidents, he was on record at some stage saying that there are no enough professional regional and town planners in this country, and the professionals kept quiet, and they know that the president cannot be correct, because the act gives the power to the professions to basically advise the minister, not the other way around. So for me, that's one of those things where I'm saying we should be careful and be firm when dealing with matters that deals with our own professions. I mean, there's nobody who can tell you today that architectural this and that. I was quite impressed with one architect, I won't mention the names, who was a architect and a principal agent on a job, okay? And then the contractor was very close to the client, right? This was for a municipality. And then the contractor went to the mayor to say, hey, this architect stroke principal agent is not paying me enough for work done. And the mayor, being the mayor, he then went to site with the contractor, and the contractor obviously showed him, what he was complaining about. And then later, whilst on site, the mayor calls the architect to come to site. And the architect said, okay, fine. And he arrived on site. Fortunately, it was not that far. And then he arrived and greeted everybody and so forth. And then he asked the mayor, why have you called me, here? And the mayor said, well, why are you not paying this contractor? And then the architect said, okay, let me just call my quantity surveyor, who was also not far. So the quantity surveyor joined. And then the architect then said, listen, according to the last payment certificate, we have paid this, for instance, the ceilings, we have paid so many percentages, but you can see that they've only done so much less. We have paid that item that they've done so less because we're trying to assist the contractor with cash flow for him to be able to, to continue. So we've reached a stage where we can no longer continue to pay for work not done, because contractually the contractor must do the work and be paid after. And the architect was telling me that then the client said, listen, I'm the client here, so I'm giving an instruction to pay this contractor. And the architect says to me, you know, I got, you know, so irritated that I told this client to say, listen, tomorrow, by show of hands, I can become a mayor tomorrow, right? But tomorrow, you can't become an architect. You must go, you know, through the educational system, go through the candidacy phase and get registered as an architect. And immediately on that, he then said, told him to say, listen, here, I'm the principal agent, I'm the boss, so I'm giving instruction to get out of my side. And if you don't do that, I'm pulling the security to, you know, to get rid of you. So what I'm saying that, you know, this is what we need as professionals to be able to advise the ministers, the politicians, not the other way around. So this is really what has basically driven me since I came into this industry. I mean, you would imagine that many years ago, there were very few opportunities for, especially us coming from the townships, to even study at what was historically a white university, let alone to study courses like architecture, quantity surveying. Yes, there was some engineering and so forth. So, you know, your own community will ask you to say, what are you doing? No, I'm at this university, and what are you doing there? I'm studying architecture, I'm studying quantity surveying. What is that? Because people are used to being a medical doctor, you know, engineer, you know, and so forth and so forth. So, but I believed in that I had to do this course so that I can then become a champion and lead my own community, that they can also see the other side of what I call populist view of, you know, education. So, you know, this is what has really kept me going and made me a different person that I am. I don't believe in the material issues. I don't believe in populist ideas. You know, I just look at what I believe in, and for me, that is a starting point. Thank you, Karuni.
Thanks, Paul. Barbara, do you just want to come in? You know, there's quite varied.
Yeah,
quite interesting. You know, kumarsen talking, you know, about the bigger picture. You know, the consequences of what we do as architects. You know, in terms of what we design and what we leave behind. Krynauw's response, I thought, was deeply personal and quite interesting, because we all have that innate ability. You know, we all have spiritual backgrounds. We've all been brought up with, you know, in cultures where that is expressed, and we learn that as young people before we even join the profession. Paul talking also around accountability, but our role as professionals in terms of accountability at a different scale, at a larger scale, around legislation and people that make decisions. Barbara, do you want to comment just in terms of your presentation as well? It's quite interesting what's coming.
Yeah, thanks, Karuni. I think what's come out is very interesting, because as much as integrity is something that is quite personal, I think it affects how we approach things on an everyday basis. And I have had, certainly in my work on the Maputo corridor, people come to me with a complaint to say, I was stopped by the traffic police and I was forced to pay a bribe. And I always love this example, because my response then is, who forced you? It's quite a different matter if there were AK-47s being pointed at your head, but since they weren't, who forced you to pay that bribe? And the reason I'm raising this is because we live in a society where we're constantly faced with this, well, I had to do it. I have a friend who said, well, I'm just working my life around how I can not have anything to do with government at all. So I'm putting a gas stove in, I'm putting solar in my house. I don't want to have anything to do with government. And those are sort of realistic things that we've got to deal with. But when one looks at ethical decisions, we've got to always answer that question. Can I live with myself with this decision? Can society benefit? Or if there's no benefit for society, is there benefit for another person? How big is that society? Is it one person? Is it 25? Is it a classroom of kids? Is it my office? All of those things. I think we've got to be very, very much more open and honest with ourselves and say, well, there are times when I don't make ethical decisions because it's so difficult. It's much easier to pay someone to just get my passport in time or to get through the hoops that government puts in place. But then I feel one doesn't have a right to complain if things are not going right, because what I've always said to these people who said, well, I was forced to pay a bribe. Well, who paid the bribe then? Did you pay the bribe or did somebody else do it? You are responsible. And I think that's something that is sometimes overlooked. But I do think we, specifically in our organizations, don't necessarily have these discussions often enough, because ethics does not come naturally in the sense that, yes, you know what's wrong, right and wrong. But when you're faced with the conundrums, how do you make those decisions without testing your thinking? And I think quite often we don't test our thinking. And thinking ethically is where it starts. Normally it's just a knee-jerk reaction. I'll do it this way because that's the way we've always done it. Like Paul was saying, you know, especially in the professions where you've got people's lives at stake, like medical profession, your professions, they're really critical. Shortcuts are taken, but what are the consequences? And I think on a daily basis, what in prep we were talking about the pothole outside my gate. What on earth do we do about that? Do we just drive past it every day? In the same way, those sorts of questions have to be answered based on what's good for everybody, what's good for me, how much, you know, where do I draw the line? But the fact is that we need to take responsibility. Ethics is about taking responsibility.
Anybody else? Before we move into the next question, which is about what do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with situations where it's not easy to decide what is right or wrong? In other words, your values and your judgment is being tested, and your ability of being able to choose what is right or wrong. Do you have difficulties taking a stance? Do you find it easy? Do you not fear? Do you just do it, or do you just do nothing? Does everyone want to respond to that? Kumarsen, do you want to go?
Yeah, look, I think we should not lose sight of the fact that there's a guiding light in life. I mean, there are rules in place, there are laws in place, and all these things are meant to inform you of what you can do, what you can't do. So it gives you the limitations. It places the limitations. When you start to act outside of that with disregard and lack of consequence, then that teaches us that you're either unaware of the accountability that comes with it, or you choose to disregard it. And I think that's through many things that we're going through at the moment with load shedding and what has actually got us here, and with the potholes that you gotta you're constantly being tested about what the relevance is about all these things that you experience in life. And then from that, you've got to prioritize and draw importance from it and say, well, can I live with driving past that pothole every day? Or am I going to just fill it up myself? Because who am I going to convince to do it otherwise? So you choose to take action on your own. Are we all going to sit by and make a huge noise about load shedding, but not act together in terms of what's right and what our right is? And I think these are decisions. So what it does do is that it talks to people having like-minded thinking. Paul hit on a very important point there, and where you said, no, it's about what's right to me. You know, it's about myself and putting you in that position. So how do you convince other people to think along those lines? Think about how you'd like them to react on something. So it's not about indoctrination or anything like that. It's trying to unify thinking. It's trying to align people to why it's necessary to do something about something, and most importantly, making a decision to do something about it. I think if a decision is made to do something about it, that is the key, and that's the trigger that would set a series of actions into play. And I think that's what's most important. Choosing not to do something because you believe it's the right thing to do is not necessarily what the action should be. So there we go. You talk about, okay, let's rally up support. Let's go and do this. You know, you're going to the polls and you're going to support someone and vote for them and do all of that. It's no different from us choosing to do something that we believe we have a right to, or we have a right for in life, because it is what we should have from it. The fact that we're not getting it does not make it right for the person that's meant to provide it for us, and that's the issue. That's what it boils down to. I'll stop there. So.
Krynauw?
Hi, we've touched on the idea of conflict in ethics. So for me, I have never been particularly conflict averse. I like a serious debate, and I find that opposition very often creates better answers, at least if you offer the opposition. Very often I find people very fearful of conflict because of the group think, because of the possible penalties for non-conforming to a group. I mean, we know that there's several stages. First of all, people will oppose you, then they will silence you, then they will exclude you. But I mean, there are times in your life when you really have to stand up for the truth or your own truth. I mean, we know that governments can actually issue laws that are unethical. So do I leave the country and go and live in a country? Uganda has just reinstated the death penalty for homosexuality. I mean, you know, that's in this country that would be unacceptable. So I have always been aware that if you widen your horizons to bigger groups than just your own, that there are other people that may disagree with your group. I like to use the example of 300 villages that have for 300 villagers live in a village on the edge of the lake, and for 300 years they believe that the water is poisoned, until one day a young child drinks the water and runs back into the town screaming, the water is not poisoned, the water is not poisoned. But the group then wants to eject him and saying he's a heretic, and you know he's challenging their values, etc. So I think there are times when you have to say, this is very clear to me. Now that conflict doesn't necessarily have to be serious aggression, but it does mean holding up a hand and say, let's stop at this. I do not agree with this. I'm not feeling comfortable with this. And to be able to face the consequences, because the one person that I have to live with 24/7 is myself. So the responsibility, just the word responsibility comes from the word to respond. And I have to be responsible for the things in my life. You know, like that doesn't help complaining. Have you ever lifted a finger to actually change the situation, the action that kumarsen was talking about? Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, krynauw. Paul, situations of conflict.
Yeah, I think the colleagues have already touched on that. And for me, I have a simple approach or rule. And the rule is as soon as conflict becomes around, yeah, so I'm still in low shedding, let me just switch off this thing. Just get rid of the conflict, simple, in favor of what you believe in. What do I mean by that? If, say, a client does not want to go with my advice, you fire the client. It's as simple as that. You know, you work with an architect or an engineer who, you know, have different ways of doing things outside the norm. The norm in this instance being your scope of services through PROXA, or even the scope of responsibilities through the contract applicable to the project. You simply put that person on notice and ask the client to replace that person, you know. And the nice thing is that, for instance, in one of the contracts, we've created a clause or process where if, say, you know, some of those agents are not acting, then you simply ask the client to give you another agent. It's as simple as that. You know, this engineer is not performing. He or she is your engineer, Mr. or Miss Client. Get rid of this guy so that we can the project can move. Or I'll help you. I'll then remove myself from this project. And basically that way you simply get rid of this conflict. So it still come back to what you believe in. You know, whether you're going to compromise in what you believe in just to, I don't know, please some external conflicted situation, or you're going to stick to what you believe in. So, you know, first of all, if there is a conflict, you know, you simply get rid of it. I mean, you know, I normally hear professionals say, no, but, you know, he's a client and he or she pays my fees. So what? So what? You know, they're not paying your fees for mahala. I mean, you are providing a service for which you need to you need to be paid fees. There's no favor situation here, right? So, and then one of the strengths of the client consultants agreement, in your instance, architect's client architect agreement, is to advise all the time. We advise the client to advise the client. And soon you realize that the client is not really responding to advice, which you know that you know, it will then create a conflict. So you've got two options: either you remove yourself from that, or you fire the client. You know, so it's as simple as that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. There was quite, I think I'll remember it, is to just get rid of the conflict. I mean, as krynauw says, he's not conflict averse. So we do need to be brave, actually. Otherwise we can't function in terms of what we do. We're just going to get bogged down in situations where we can't actually find a way to get out of it. Not just professionally, but, I mean, the pothole situation is I keep thinking of that. Barbara?
Look, I think what's important is that ethics is about accountability. It is about responsibility. And for you, or as an individual, or for myself, to come into a situation where you're aware that there's something that's not entirely kosher, and for you not to do anything about it makes you liable for things going wrong. And if you can do, there are times when obviously what you can do is very limited, but asking questions is important, and taking a stand. I think, well, that's my personal approach, is people will know straight up that I will not do work for certain organizations because they are dodgy, and because of the way, and certainly I've been approached by organizations to work with them on projects, and it's not even been a moral dilemma for me to say no thank you, because I know how they get the work, and so on. And yeah, I think we've got to really be clear. We're in a society that needs leadership in terms of ethics, and that means every single one of us has a responsibility to be those leaders. Thanks.
Thanks, Barbara. Kumarsen was taking a step forward, you know, in terms of talking to the next question, which is about, you know, the morals and the beliefs of the group, you know, as opposed to yourself, and situations where you are not aligned with the group think. Because Kumarsen, earlier you were also talking about rallying people, you know, rallying like-minded people who have similar positions to you, as a strategy of dealing with that conflict. But so we just move into the next sort of question is more around you know, what happens when the moral position of the group differs hugely from where you are, your moral position, right? And there's a whole lot of people similar to you that have that dilemma. What do you do? Do you steer away? How do you deal with that situation? Kumarsen, do you want to talk to them?
Yeah, look, let's reel it in. It's easy to talk about group and group thinking, and it's a lot more difficult to achieve it. So let's just reel it into our daily professional lives. Let's bring it to that point. You know, horses for courses. Paul hit on a very, very important point. There should be clients for architects. So if your client's not aligned to what your value system is and what your morals and ethics are about how you want to do business and how you want to engage with them, it does not hurt unless you make a commercial decision that you're doing this out of pure desperation. That means you are putting those values aside for an end game. And is that okay? Is that okay to do? I mean, are we doing this just for the fees? And more often than not, we're doing it and not getting paid for doing it, and you're still being held accountable and responsible for everything that you're doing. And therein lies the irony of the whole thing. You're so willing to do something for a client that's not aligned to your thinking that it's kind of it's changed your thinking about how you'd like to do things. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. Don't be afraid to tell a client that this is my position on it, and under no circumstances am I willing to change my position on it. And you got to remind them why they walk through the door. They walk through the door because you invariably have something to offer them, and you invariably have something to offer them of value, and that's why they're there. If they could do what you could do, they'd never be there. But yet they choose to take a position or a stance on insisting, I am the client and you will do what's asked of you. And that is not how these things work. It doesn't work like You know, you don't go and tell your neurosurgeon to conduct surgery on you in a certain way because that's what you read in a magazine somewhere, or you think you know better. You don't know better. That's why you're there. You're there seeking a solution that's fit for purpose, and that's what it's all about. So it does not hurt, because I believe for every 10 clients that you show the door and say to them, this is my thinking, unless you align yourself to my thinking and how I would like to provide that service to you, and walk away happy with what I've done, then there's nothing more to discuss. And I think that's where we're kind of losing our place in society. And like the point I made earlier about architects just being a player in someone else's game. But what role are you playing there? Who are you in this game? Are you lead? Are you the lead actor in this whole series of events that's taking place? Who are you there? Have you defined your role? Who's more important than you there? And I think if we constantly ask ourselves those questions and test, well, it goes along in testing our values, because then you're not getting lost in what someone else's view of you is, and that's for architects. I think that's of paramount importance. Always, and most clients don't understand what we do. Most clients don't know what they want until they sit down or they have a look at something that's been done. You know, it's difficult. You've got to extract a brief out of a client. They don't even have the ability to do that. I'm saying, do you take them down a path, and knowing that they don't know what they want, and intentionally give them the wrong thing? No, you don't do that, because it's your moral and ethical commitment to that client to always act in a professional manner at all times, and guide them in seeing things the way you see it. The fact that they don't like gray and they may like a red wall makes it very subjective. But what is the overall solution to what you're offering them? Does that make sense for someone that didn't know what they wanted? And I think that's what it is. I mean, get your client aligned to what you're thinking is. Don't be afraid to speak your mind and tell a client, this is what we believe is the right solution for you. And give them that option, you know, put them in a position where they have to make a choice, and let them think it through. The fact that they're not made aware of it does not make it right for you to not tell them. You know, it's just for me, it's tantamount to acting unprofessionally in doing that. So it's just about, okay, let's just do what we need to do and get rid of this client and move on with our lives. And hopefully the next client that walks through there will be more aligned to our thinking. I'll stop there.
Building leadership, kumarsen, yourself as
absolutely.
Krynauw, so we're talking about moral positions of a group where they don't align with yourself, with your own values.
Well, one of the things about gray areas that I've just been thinking about is that if you investigate gray, it will typically pixelate to black and white at some point. So investigate the situation. Look at it from 40 sides. Look at it from an outside perspective. And eventually you will come to something that you'll find is an irrevocable truth. This is the truth, and we cannot get behind that. Now, we have, over the last 30 years or so as architects, we've lost an incredible amount of status. And I believe it's also because of our own maybe lack of standing up for things that are wrong. And not checking our own ethical behavior. I remember one of the great gurus in my life teaching us practice and said, if you want an easy life, work only with people with ethics and that reliable and honest. You'll never have a difficult day in your life. So it seems that corruption seeps into everything, bad standards, and it becomes the new norm. And I think that's why realigning the moral compass is so important. Another thing that we haven't touched on is, there are two things in the SAIA Code of Ethics which I find particularly important. One is client confidentiality. I think very few architects are even aware of the fact that client confidentiality is part of ethics. In other words, you can't discuss your client's budgets, designs, etc., in an open environment. I use the example of, I get so excited that a big company has asked me to do a development. They've identified the land and we're going to do a new city there. And the next thing, my client finds that the land has been sold because one of my contacts told another contact that told another contact that the land was available, and it's sold under the nose of my client. So that is an ethical thing, and I also think that we can use it to our own benefit. I remember when fighting the duty of care letters that the banks wanted architects to sign, that I said, I will not allow architects to sign this because you're actually asking us to breach client confidentiality and tell you, an outside party to the contract, what's happening with my client's finances, designs, etc. Get out of the way. I'm not interested in having this relationship of disclosing confidential information to you. The other thing that is of great importance to me is that in the environment of architect and client, there is always a third party, and that's the site. And the poor site doesn't seem to have anybody in the contract standing up for it. Well, that's our duty as the architect. If I'm working with a heritage site or a sensitive site, I am actually responsible for looking after the interests of this inanimate thing called the site. And I wonder how many people will actually, that's an interesting question. Coca-Cola said that they can buy 200 hectares in the middle of the Kruger Park to put up a new factory. Are you going to take that job? Absolutely not. Over my dead body will I go in there with something that will ruin the environment. So I think environmental responsibility is also something that we must look at, because it's part of our it's part of our code of conduct, code of ethics, sorry. I'm just touching again on the fact that ethics are subjective and conduct is very much an attempt to codify something subjective. I remember that SACAP wanted to reissue their code of conduct as a code of ethics, and I explained to them, you are actually doing a form of a bylaw, a board notice, and that has to be 100% objective, because that is one of the things the law requires itself, to be very objective. Can I measure it? Can I see it? Can I observe it? And we actually got them off, and they stayed with the code of conduct. While we as the architects, the voluntary associations, have a code of ethics. But for me, it's always going to be an attempt to codify something. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Krynauw. Paul, do you want to contribute to that question? It's about the when you are conflicted with a moral position of a larger group that doesn't align with your. And then we've got some lovely questions coming in from the audience, so we'll just launch into questions after that.
No, Chair, I think what Barbara has said for me stands out, that this response to say I had to do it, but there's nobody who literally put a gun on your head to do it. So for me, there's a starting point as a professional to say, where I believe that things must happen this way or whatever, whether it be design, whatever. And there's this group, I refer them as, populism. You've got two options. I normally have two options. The first one is to try and persuade the group until they can see the light of day, what I'm all about. Okay. The second one is to basically take the lead, and then in the process, those who are able to follow at some point at a corner somewhere, they'll then become much more enlightened and much wiser to say, oh, this is what he meant all the time, so that they can then live with us. But for no matter how strong the group's view might be, as long as it's not in line with your own values, your own ethics, you should not even go there, because unlike this thing, you can't say I had to do it. Now you must really look at the consequence of your ethical decision that you make at any given point in time to say, what impact is it going to create? What legacy is this going to do? I mean, one of the most common example that I normally ask in project site meetings after the health and safety consultant has done their report, and they normally come with a score to say we are sitting at about 60–70%, because there's a whole range of health and safety requirements not met. And I would ask the question to say, well, the contractor this, that, and that. And I ask a direct question. So, colleague, health and safety consultant, is this site or is this project as it stands compliant or not? And I ask the question, yes or no. And if the answer is no, and I'll then shut down the site. And you can see everybody looking at me with very interesting. But that's a reality, because health and safety is about life. Any mistake that happens, we're losing lives. We cannot afford to have this, that situation. So one needs to be very clear to say, even though the group might say, okay, let's understand, maybe the health and safety guy will do this, or contractor will improve on this. If they don't qualify, they don't comply, then shut down the site. It's as simple as that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Barbara, there's some questions coming in, and we're running out of time. Could I ask you to answer this question, Barbara? A scenario: if you outsource, knowing or not knowing that you bribe someone to get the work, does that make me unethical? This is from Chichona Denheri. I hope I pronounced it properly.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. But if you don't know what you don't know, and so that wouldn't make you unethical. However, if you knew or you find out later in the project, I think one has to make a stand about that. I'm all for that, making a stand and making people aware that you're aware, and that you're drawing some sort of boundary and creating a boundary that says, I didn't know, but this does affect the way that we work. And for me, I feel uncomfortable. I think these are the kinds of challenges we've got to really face with a great deal of courage. And if we look at people like Ethel Williams, who has been absolutely vilified for whistleblowing, and Cynthia Stimple, all of these people have really paid a huge price. But I'm so grateful to them because of the awareness that it's created. Because one has to look at the bigger picture as well and say, if they hadn't done what they did and taken a stand, those elements would be so much worse than they are. And I think we owe so much to people who can say, if I find out in this question, the work's been outsourced, but I didn't know, but I happened to find out later, I would really question your strength of ethical values if there is no response in that case. And I think one has to really make a stand. It's a very difficult thing. I'm not saying that it's easy. And so often the conflict is internal rather than an external one. But I always have to ask the question, who does it affect? How does it affect them? How will it affect me? How will it affect the work that we do? Because sometimes it's those sorts of ethical questions do not have that kind of range of impact. But I think one has to constantly evaluate the range of impact, and also just have a personal. And this is why I say it's so important to talk about ethics, because by talking about the principles and the philosophy and the whole personal approach, the values, the morals, you do tend to create your own standard or your own ethical standard. And I think that's crucial. A lot of people don't know what they think about ethics unless they've had direct challenge with it. You know, so I think it's a critical question, a very important question.
Kumarsen, there's a question from Jacques de Villiers. It's around work at risk. You know, with developers expecting architects to work at risk and work being scarce, how do we prevent our industry from conforming to the lowest common denominator?
Yeah, I think, you know, very valid, very pertinent question. We had a brief discussion about, you know, why there were 10,000 architects, in excess of 10,000 architects about 20 years ago, and now there's about 3,500 architects or less in the country. And just that is extremely telling, because it's either the essence of what we do is being lost by ourselves. So in other words, we are our own worst enemies in doing that. We are enabling delinquent clients to take advantage of what we're doing. And that's on us. That's entirely on us. And you know, I said it earlier and I'll say it again, horses for courses. If your client's not aligned to your thinking, you know, don't be embarrassed to tell him, you know, it's cheaper for me to sit here and look at my four walls than to do something for you and not get paid for it. And watch the expression on his face. He's going to probably look at you in complete disgust and say, how dare you be so arrogant about who you are and what you do? And that comes purely from a place of knowing who you are and what you do. That's all it is. And having the ability and the courage to protect that at any cost whatsoever. So if it means that by making a statement like that, that client is walking out, that's fine. Why do some clients choose to pay who they want to pay and not others? So there is a nefarious intention or a disingenuous intention from the beginning. The intention is, I'm going to get you to do as much work for me for free without even understanding the magnitude or the consequence of that. So yeah, is it right to have 90% of risk work in your office and 10% of paying work covering that 90% of work? It's never going to work. It's completely untenable. So who knows better than you to tell your client that is completely unacceptable to you? It's completely unacceptable to your value system. To say, thank you, but no thank you, but, you know, I hope you enjoyed the cup of coffee, but, you know, you can leave through the same door that you walked in. And I think those are the things. I think that's what we're not doing enough of. Unless you're so uncertain about what you're doing or what's expected of you as an architect and what your title holds for you, that you're allowing people to bully you, take advantage of what you do, which is completely wrong. Completely wrong. I mean, as a professional person, would you walk into someone else's business and have an expectation or an entitlement that that person's supposed to do something for you for free? So yet again, let risk work be the exception rather than the rule in your practice. Your rule is doing work that pays you for what you're doing. That's what it is. And that shows sustainability in a business. That shows longevity. That makes you understand, this is what I do, and this is how I'm adding value. And getting paid for it, obviously. Yeah.
It's also important to do the explanation so that there's some learning that takes place. You know, in whichever situation, absolutely essential. Otherwise, one is losing the opportunity, but also the opportunity to swing things around. Krynauw, you sound like you'd like to say something.
I just wanted to add to the whole risk thing. Okay, people talk about risk work. Risk at some point must end, because that's the whole point of risk. If I tell you that you're going to work on risk for 12 years, you're not going to be it's not going to be appetizing. So the way to deal with risk work actually is to say to your client, I'm not allowed to do architectural work for you unless we have an agreement in writing. That is part of my SAIA code of conduct. So I am aware that you want to develop a project, but I am going to enter into a deferred payment agreement with you. And that payment agreement says that the moment the QS and the client and I agree that this project is feasible, I will be paid for the work done so far, and I will be the only architect appointed. Also, watch out. One of the questions I ask my client is, they say, we're investigating something. I say, how many architects are you talking to? 3 or 4 of you. I said, well, when you've made your decision and none of them work for you, come back to me. But I'm not competing against my fellow architects. Why should I compete? You know, if you want to use me, you do your due diligence on me and what I do, and then you'll know that I'm the person for this job or not. But don't ask us to tap into 4 architects, bleed them all of stage 1, bleed them all of stage 2, nobody gets paid. And I mean, we've lost so much. So I'm just raising the point of get an agreement in writing for deferred payment. I am appointed based on the condition that once the project is feasible, I will be the project architect and no one else will be appointed in my place to continue work on this project. And I need to do that because my SACAP says it's illegal to work for you without an agreement in writing. So that's one way of dealing with it. And don't compete. I mean, you know, there's enough work in a country of 60 million people to serve the 3,500 architects that are left. So be proud of yourself. At GIFA, I mean, we are constantly trying to build this fraternity, sorority of architects by having the breakfast once a month. And at the breakfast, I often say one of the purposes of this breakfast is that you can see whose plate you're emptying sitting on the other side of the table from you today. When you do risk work, when you do all of these things that you shouldn't be doing, that's costing us all money. Be proud of your work. Be proud of the things that you do. Thank you.
Thanks, Krynauw. Paul, could I ask you a question? Do you believe that transformation is an ethical issue? You know, just because things don't affect us, should it not bother us? Can you answer that question? It's a question from me. Is transformation an ethical issue?
Yeah. The short answer is it's yes. You know, an architect cannot really practice or provide architectural services in an environment where there's no transformation. It's as simple as that. So it then becomes imperative as a ethical issue for the architects to be aware of those issues, because transformation is linked to a whole range of other issues. You know, Krynauw just mentioned a very good point, where if Coca-Cola wants to buy a piece of land in Kruger National Park to do a plant, you know, are you going to take it or not? You can't, because it's an ethical issue, you know. And so transformation, there are many examples that we can look into, which basically strengthen the fact that you know, transformation, it is an ethical issue. And one of the ethical issues, maybe just to sideline the questions about all this risk and all this, you know, the law in this country is very simple, right? For the architects, we've got the law called the South African, you know, Council for the Architectural Professions Act. I think it's Act 44 of 2000 is the law. And in terms of that law, there's a code of conduct. And then for all this risk, you know, I normally wonder what's wrong with the many architects that get involved in their dispute issues with their clients, where they don't comply with section 4.1 of that code of conduct. I mean, this, you know, is a law. You know, you have to do it. Not a question of well, yes, maybe. You know, before you undertake any project for anybody, you know, you have to comply with all those. I think there are about 12 or 15 of them in terms of 4.1. But, you know, for a short answer, Karuni, yes, transformation is very much an ethical issue. Thank you.
No, thanks. We need to tie up.
Yeah, sorry, Karuni, before you go there, there's quite a good question that's come through from someone. It's anonymous, but I think it's a very pertinent question, and it's got to do with an employer being unethical that someone works for, and how are you supposed to deal with this, knowing that there is unethical behavior there or something untoward. And I think it's really valid, and I think there's a lot of this going around as well. So yeah, I think before we close out, it's a good question to get into and get some discussion going around that.
Would you like to answer that, Kumarsen?
Yeah. So yeah. Look. Yeah. I think this. I think the approach is exactly the same in terms of what I alluded to earlier. I think if there's alignment in terms of a value system about who you work for, who you'd like to work with, and how you'd like to work with them, I think that in essence is what this is all about. If that person who is your employer, in this case, is known to be unethical or behaving badly in some way or the other, you invariably are associated with that, because if you know it, many other people out there know exactly that and understand something about the built environment. It's an extremely small fraternity, and that kind of thing gets out quite quickly. So the short answer is save yourself from that so-called sinking ship. You know, jump ship. There's nothing wrong with that, because it's not something that you're aligned to, and that's not something you want to be associated with. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So stand by your value system and don't get caught up in that, and try to move away from it, distance yourself from it, separate yourself from it, and that would be the way to deal with it. And it may be a very difficult decision, a moral and ethical decision, very difficult, but an extremely necessary decision to make. So, and it's not what you want to be told. It's not right to do that. So yeah, that's what I'd like to say about that, Karuni. I think it's very pertinent.
Yeah, to all of us, not just the employer, but often one finds oneself in situations where you can be drawn in and also be part of the problem. And yeah, by association, you become part of the problem if you're not able to deal with situations or not be able to stand up to them. I need to apologize for going over the 2 hours allocated. If the audience could forgive us for that. And I'm going to do a round of a quick 2-minute round with everybody. It's just a summary of what you would like to leave us with. And maybe I'll start with you, Barbara, because you're top left on my screen.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 2 minutes to do that.
I'm sure everyone's aware of or familiar with C.S. Lewis's quote that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. And I think that is a very powerful guide, if you like, about ethics as well. Ethics is doing the right thing even when no one is watching, even when there is no apparent benefit for you financially or otherwise. And I think it's a very important challenge for us in this country particularly. And as I say, without the necessary leadership, we have no hope. And but I am hopeful because I think the ethics discussion is as alive as the discussion on corruption. So I'm very hopeful that we will actually make headway and get some traction. And just to say thank you so much for the opportunity to share your discussion. I've learned an enormous amount. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Krynauw, would you like to go next?
I would really just like to say it warms the cockles of my heart that we are having a workshop on ethics. That is the start, and it shows an interest, and the high attendance numbers that I've seen for this event is really, really encouraging. A favorite quote: the only thing required for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing, good people to do nothing. Let me change that gender. And then a very, very quick answer to somebody that asked, what do I do if my client wants to build and the plans are not approved yet? You do not do a site handover. It's as simple as that. You will not force me to break the law by going on site without approved plans. If you want to get another architect to do stage 5 and 6 for you, be my guest, let them break the law. But I have often refused to go on site or do a site handover in the absence of approved plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Krynauw. Paul, your 2-minute parting.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's a fruitful discussion. All what I can do is to encourage the professional architects to become, I don't know how to explain it, but you know, read your act almost daily, like you know, people will read their documents every day, whether it be a Bible or a Quran, whatever. The act is got so much information pertaining to the code of conduct and the ethics. It's amazing. When one reads it, you know, you probably find that all the challenges that has been discussed can be resolved, especially with the code of conduct. You know, I normally code, you know, clause 4.1 that will, you know, resolve most of the issues. And by the way, I do also take matters where I represent professionals, you know, architects, engineers, even quant surveyors, who have been sued by clients for either design work, cost overruns, term overruns, and so forth. And the common weakness that I find when dealing with those issues is purely because colleagues don't really, for some reason, want to follow through and use what the code of conduct or even the act gives them the powers to do. Thank you, Chair.
Kumarsen. 2 minutes.
Yeah. Within my 2 minutes. Yeah. Look, I think a lot has been said, and I think it's essentially food for thought. And it does not matter that the attendees were largely professionals, in the built environment. I don't know how many of that. It would be good to test how many of that forms part of other industries. But look, I think for me the parting shot would be, if everybody could, make humility the center of their core values in terms of everything that they approach, in how they live their daily lives. That will go a long way in, whether you're needing to act in a professional level or a personal level in your life, that you constantly challenge with these decisions. They're difficult decisions all the time, but if humility is the center of that, and that's made up of respect and courage and justice and all of those virtues, kindness, all of those good things that we'd like to kind of pass on to other people, then from that we can kind of deduce that ethics arises from a practical moral position, and right and wrong for different people mean different things, and that's what it is. It's how people perceive that to be, in their lives. But it does not, as long as there is a value system in place and you're able to make a rational choice in making that decision, I think that is in essence what it's all about. I think being able to laterally think about a decision that's necessary is core to acting ethically and morally. Yeah, in everything that we do, and I think it's so vast and so broad and so not complicated but so complex, that people tend to push it aside and say, no, but I've never been faced with a moral or ethical issue. But how could you have not been faced with that? Do you not understand what it is? And I think you're making those decisions constantly on a daily basis, whether you are approaching it from a moral or ethical point of view, you are making a decision at the end of the day and that decision invariably is affecting someone's life. So yeah, I'd like to leave it there and put a different spin on it and say I think that humility should be the core or the essence of that value system.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, very much for taking this on. Content of this webinar was a challenge, but a good challenge. And thank you to Barbara for your presentation. It was really good to have somebody from outside our profession to give us an overview that you did. And krynauw, definitely something we must do again. And thanks to the panelists for your time and also your input in terms of the way that we structured this and all the interactions that I had with all of you. Barbara, it was great meeting you, and we hope to keep in touch with the Ethics Institute, but just for SAIA members or attendees to know that there is something called an Ethics Institute. They do a lot of training, they do good training, they have material which I read, which is why I contacted the Ethics Institute. And to my 3 colleagues who I've known for a while, and I do have a background, and I know the high level of ethics of all 3 of them, kumarsen, krynauw, and Paul. Thank you very much for taking us on. And thank you to SAFL for continuing to sponsor the series. And good night to everybody, and go well, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Karuni. Thanks, SAIA, for the opportunity. And the participants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everybody, goodbye.
Bye.
Building is more than assembling a structure, more than putting the pieces together. It's about building relationships, building trust, building pride. It's about having a vision and seeing it come to life as a testament to human strength and creativity. That's why we do what we do, driven by passion and powered by state-of-the-art technology. SAFL Steel is an African thought leader in world-class building solutions that offer long-term sustainability. We are the only producer of aluminium zinc-coated products in South Africa, and each product in our range is made with pride and care. Our pre-painted color-coated steel sheets are lightweight, fire-resistant, weatherproof, eco-friendly, and energy-reflective. They are easy to install and highly durable, not to mention beautiful to look at. We also manufacture pre-painted coils, international quality, produced locally. At SAFL Steel, quality assurance is a key priority. We demand extensive quality checks during manufacture, which is why we have confidence in our product warranty. Beyond our product offering, our services also include training, technical support during the building process, and expert knowledge resources. That's because we love being part of the journey, every step of the way. SAFL Steel, building Africa together and building it with pride.